The roots of Pink Floyd are entwined with the story of Syd Barrett. Syd was the original lead guitarist and main writer in the band. It was his quirky, very English sound which first brought Pink Floyd to the attention of EMI Records. Arnold Lane gave the band an unexpected hit single.
One day, around about Easter 1967, I just tuned in one morning. I was on holiday and heard this really strange record coming out of the transistor, and it was Arnold Lane by the Pink Floyd. Never heard of the Pink Floyd before, and I thought, listened to it, I thought, what is this?
People listening to it must have thought, who are these bands? What are they talking about? What is this sound? It was quite unlike anything that was around in the charts at the time, and it was really a message to say there's something else going on here, and people are listening to other kinds of music, more than just simple pop songs.
There was a whole thing about the Englishness of it, and of course the lyrics were very weird, and you know, later on I found out that they were about a transvestite, you know, this guy in Cambridge who nicked women's clothing off Syd's mum's washing line, which was brilliant.
The first album, released in the recording partnership between EMI and Pink Floyd, was Piper at the Gates of Dawn, released in 1967. The album was recorded in Studio 3 at Abbey Road. At the same time, the Beatles were working on Sgt. Pepper in Studio 2 next door.
I was just very, very excited. Doing your first album, putting down your music onto tape, and knowing that the Beatles are next door doing Sgt. Pepper. Because I was a bit of a snob before then. I was a real jazzo, and I didn't really believe that pop music meant anything at all. When I heard Sgt. Pepper, it changed my attitude to what people like us could do.
When you look at that album, it's actually not an album. It's like before that, people just made singles and they put tracks together and that made an album. There was a little bit of that. There were songs on it like Interstellar Overdrive, but it wasn't a complete album really. It was like, shit, we've made this bloody record. We've had hits with this mad band. We better put a bloody album out.
I think musically successful, immediately at the time, probably not, but in hindsight, absolutely essential, successful music.
Really announces Syd Barrett's arrival as a special songwriter, somebody who was quite different from the normal pop songwriter of the day. Even though you couldn't quite understand the lyrics, you knew that there was something strange there, strange going on, and it provoked intrigue.
Syd Barrett was probably the most important thing that Floyd ever happened to them. It was his conception and his idea and mind that set the pattern for Floyd. Even though he left prematurely, it was his lyrics and things like Arnold Lane. That was really Syd Barrett. It was the phase one.
When one thinks that the other three members of Pink Floyd at the time were all architects or architect students, and Syd was an art student, to me architecture is fairly rigid and has some formula to it, whereas art doesn't have formula to it, is not rigid. And that was the element that he brought into Pink Floyd that I think made Pink Floyd what they were at that period of time. Yes, Syd was very important to Pink Floyd.
it was a very different era. I mean, you know, I don't think that EMI really understood what they got. And it was all a case of, you know, Joe Boyd, who was another part of the whole underground scene, had produced Arnold Lane, but he got pushed out in favour of Norman Smith, who was a pop producer. Not that he wasn't a bad pop producer, I mean, he did some great classic records. But so I think there was a lot of pressures all of a sudden on the Pink Floyd to be a pop band. And in fact, they weren't really like that at all. They were playing this kind of like what became known as space rock music.
Piper was to be the only album made by the original Pink Floyd lineup. It features Syd Barrett on guitar and vocals, Roger Waters on bass and vocals, with Richard Wright on keyboards and Nick Mason on drums.
Piper at the Gates of Dawn is a special album because it's the only one that Pink Floyd actually recorded in its entirety with Syd Barrett. So it will always be remembered for that reason, if perhaps not that it had any great hit singles on it.
Piper at the Gates really is a work of its time, very strongly influenced by the prevailing psychedelic sound of the time.
I remember when Syd joined the band, he had all these incredible ideas, lyrically and musically. Very strange, and very childish in a way, some of his stuff. I mean, it's kind of very fairy tales and all this stuff, but totally unique. I'd never heard anything like it, and it was fabulous.
I don't think any of those early songs really display what Pink Floyd was going to do, with the exception of Astronomy Domini, Interstellar Overdrive, and one or two others.
It's ragged, it's individual, but I can't say that it's great form in the sense of structure in composition.
Arnold Lane, Arnold Lane, Arnold Lane, Arnold Lane.
The only time I saw Syd Barrett was when he popped into the Abbey Road session, and when we were doing Atom Heart Mother, and he kind of spun round a couple of times in slow motion and then went out again, and that was about it. That's all I ever saw of him.
Although Roger Waters is no longer complimentary about the album as a whole, he still holds great affection for Syd's lyrics.
I've got a bike, you can ride it if you like. It's got a basket, a bit of rings and things to make it look good. I'd give it to you if I could, but I borrowed it. There's something about the way the lyric attaches to the meter in a very satisfying way, but then that gets, but I borrowed it, kind of kicks it off into, there's something very English about that, about the completeness of that, and yet the fact that it's so unpredictable. I think it was the unpredictability of it combined with its simplicity that made it so special.
As well as the new album, Barrett was also required to produce material for a string of singles. The second was See Emily Play, which also charted.
Emily tries but misunderstands.
So we have the verse kind of resting and ending on a G major chord. Then the chorus, There Is No Other Way, goes to an E major, which is not in the key of G major, and we're expecting really, or I'm expecting E minor, the relative minor to G major. But in fact we get E major, so we're introducing a G sharp into the song, and we're in the key of A and G, so that's not really expected. So we get this just rocking backwards and forwards between E and D major chords. And finally ending up on an A7 and then G.
If you look at it in terms of a great pop single, yeah, it was better. I mean, it's got some fantastic hard rock drumming on it, it was just a really magical song. I mean, I think it was inspired by Syd's girlfriend at the time, and yeah, I thought it was absolutely terrific. In a sense, those first two singles really opened up a whole new direction for English rock music.
After that, Syd's touch seemed to be deserting him. Apples and Oranges was not a success.
Got a flip touch. Cigarettes in the pipe, feeling good at the touch. Shopping at shops, walking in the sunshine town, feeling very cool.
By then, the band were really beginning to chomp at the bit about being forced to go out and do conventional pop promotion. I mean, there's a great story of Syd and how his appearance degenerated over the course of 3 Top of the Pops appearances. You know, in the first one he was this sort of lovely sort of flower child, and by the third one he was barefoot, his hair was dishevelled and everything.
Subsequent efforts were very poor indeed and never saw the light of day. Vegetable Man was one such effort which was literally thrown together on the spot.
I saw him writing Vegetable Man. He wrote it in our sitting room, and he just sat there because he had to have a song for the session, and he just sat there and wrote, and it was just a description of himself and of where he was and what he was doing, you know.
By the end of 1967, the Floyd were beginning to really disintegrate because Syd was getting further and further out. I mean, he was just taking LSD constantly. And I mean, the other 3 guys in the band, they were not particularly big drug takers.
LSD, as I think a lot of people are aware, is a very, very powerful hallucinogen. And constant exposure to it can cause serious damage, leading to schizophrenia, certainly paranoia, and particularly this drug, as with cannabis, can have serious debilitating effects on the mind, because when you're not taking the drug, there is a high probability of flashback. It is extremely difficult if you do develop brain damage because of heavy LSD usage. Don't expect for someone to be able to wave a magic wand and fix it, because it may not be as fixable as you would like.
People often ascribe Syd Barrett's breakdown to drugs, but it was more to do with his songwriting and where it took him, and his frustration at not being able to recreate the sounds in his head on stage or indeed on record.
Syd Barrett's drug problems and his sudden descent into madness are all well documented. At the time, it presented Pink Floyd with a huge challenge.
It was very difficult because we had decided at this point that what we wanted to do was Syd become rather like a Brian Wilson, if you like, and stay at home and write, because we knew by then it was impossible, he couldn't perform on stage. So I had to say things like, Syd, I'm going out to get some cigarettes, and then go off and do a gig and come back the next day. And it was awful. I mean, it was a terrible time.
We were miming to see him play or something, I think, like that. And through the run-throughs, he'd be miming away. And then they'd go, okay, we'll take it, because we were taping it. And then when they went, action, he'd stand there like that. Cut, cut. Okay, we're doing it now, guys. Ready? And Syd go, yeah, yeah, yeah. And he'd do it, and he'd do it again and again, until finally we had to say, listen, he's a bit weird, you know, I'll mime it.
In the Fillmore, east or west, probably the west, when Syd literally went on stage and just stared straight into space and detuned all his strings on his guitar and hitting it until it was just this god-awful noise.
Shall I roll with laughter, or shall I try and kill him?
Barrett was still the main writer and creative driving force behind the band. There had always been an experimental aspect to the music of Pink Floyd, but there was now a danger that in performance, Barrett's mental problems were rapidly coming to the fore. As Barrett's on-stage performances became increasingly erratic, a second guitarist, David Gilmour, an old friend from Cambridge, was brought in to provide cover and help steady the ship.
Which obviously was the start of a very difficult and strange time, with both Syd and I turning up together to rehearsals and going out and doing shows with 5 of us, where I would be learning and playing Syd's parts and singing Syd's songs, while Syd would be sort of standing there and sometimes singing a little bit and sometimes playing a little bit, and very odd.
After only 5 gigs with the band, Gilmour became a replacement for Barrett, who simply drifted out of the picture. The 2 guitarists worked briefly side by side on A Saucerful of Secrets, the second Floyd album, The album contains very little of Barrett's playing and only one Barrett composition. Today, the exact contribution from every musician is very far from clear. The first album had shown Pink Floyd being influenced by the prevailing sound of the day. The second would begin to show the band as innovators who would influence a whole generation to come. A Saucer Full of Secrets marks the beginning of the true Pink Floyd sound. Here we see the move away from psychedelic whimsy towards something unique and altogether more imposing.
Title track, which runs some 12-15 minutes, which in those days was quite unheard of, to have any song lasting that long. And it's arranged almost like a symphonic piece, an avant-garde symphonic piece, which experiments, it asks questions, all these in musical terms, and then finally there's a resolution of or sort of classical ending of the piece. Some beautiful chord sequences.
I think Saucer Full of Secrets is a much easier album to listen to, but then of course, being someone who likes Pink Floyd, and again, Pink Floyd's influenced me a lot in the studio. It's an album where you can actually go back and get quite a few good ideas from, whereas with the Piper at the Gates of Dawn, not so much.
Saucer Full of Secrets, for me, was the first Floyd album.
It was a transition period from Syd obviously going completely bonkers, and Dave Gilmour coming into the band. And Syd was still there, and I believe he was involved with 3 of the tracks, possibly playing guitar, and also wrote the track Jug Band Blues, which says it kind of all about Syd, really, when you listen to that track.
I don't care if the sun doesn't shine, and I don't care if nothing is mine, and I don't care if I'm nervous with you. I'll do my loving in the winter.
But it was much more of an album. It was a more complete album. It was a more, piece of work, and it was where they were always going to go.
Floyd were doing all these new interesting things, experimenting with sound effects, and but certainly Rick Wright had a lot to do with producing the interesting keyboard effects. He played a Hammond organ, and he was a trained classical pianist, but rather than being a jazz group, Pink Floyd were a kind of an extension of that. It was the new jazz, in a way, what they were doing.
If you asked any of the guys, they'd probably say they were better musicians because they were progressing, So maybe it was a better album. For my taste, I thought both records were great. They were just moving on and you were going with them.
In 1969, with the band increasingly on the map, Floyd were asked to produce the musical soundtrack for the film More.
Was the More soundtrack satisfying? Personally, no.
Okay, all right, soundtrack. I don't like soundtrack albums. And when Floyd make soundtrack albums, they sound really like soundtrack albums.
Apprehension creeping like a tube train up your spine. Will the tightrope reach the end? Will the final couplets rhyme?
The film itself is patchy and inconsistent and really fails to take full advantage of the burgeoning musical talent on offer. The soundtrack album released to accompany the film falls equally flat. Nonetheless, there are still a number of highlights which made it into the stage set for 1969 and 1970.
You've got to look at the Floyd in their kind of original context, which is they were part of this new underground culture that was coming out. And it spread far beyond just music and fashion. It was informing all different walks of life, writing, painting, and 60s filmmaking was very radical.
The music was obviously written for a film. I mean, when you play the soundtrack separately, it's if you're going to take Pink Floyd style, it's more of the sort of dinner music background type of feel. But there are a couple of absolutely outstanding tracks on there. Cirrus Minor's one of them, and the Nile song.
Anglo-American rock was not big in France until that album came out, and for Pink Floyd, you know, again, a good move.
For me, as a Floyd fan, it was like a little aside, waiting for the next proper record. That's how I saw that.
Fortunately, as well as the More soundtrack, Pink Floyd were also hard at work on an album of their own. This was to be Gumma, also released in 1969. This new offering gave the growing army of Floyd fans the chance to enjoy a double helping of Pink Floyd. Disc 2 was a complete studio album featuring 4 individual pieces from the 4 band members. None have gone on to become Floyd classics, but Grantchester Meadows is the piece which works best.
I think there's kind of like quite a nice sort of folky sort of element there. I mean, I think Grantchester Meadows is the beginning for me of the pastoral Pink Floyd, which I personally really, really liked, and it was something that they only did for a little bit of time, just at the end of the 60s or the early 70s.
The studio album, which has a number of tracks by each member of the band, the best way to describe that is probably it's interesting.
Now, if you really want to confuse people, why don't you put out a double album which has got 1 live record and 1 studio record, and then divide the studio record up into quarters so everybody gets a nice share of the royalties? When you were selling as many records as Pink Floyd were doing in those days, you certainly wised up quickly to the revenue earning potential. And of course, this was before Roger Waters had exerted his stranglehold on the band.
Atom Heart Mother, released in 1970, was the album which finally convinced the world of the latent power of Pink Floyd. Like many other bands at the time, Pink Floyd were experimenting to see what could be achieved by the group with an orchestra. Often, the results of these collaborations proved to be a disastrous failure. Atom Heart Mother defied the trend.
They were using ideas that they'd taken from A Saucer Full of Secrets, their second album, and some of the soundtrack albums that they'd been commissioned to write. And they developed the idea of one piece working over a whole side of an album, about 20 minutes or so, using an orchestra and choir, and getting effects that they would later be able to recreate using keyboards and sound effects.
Because they were kind of exhausted because of commitments and demands by the manager and EMI Records, they needed some other input. So, because I was friends with them all, I was asked to do that input, or be that input, really. The art bit was getting a couple of melodies that really worked. And I believe that the opening theme melody really works, and the cello melody really works. They're entirely out of my head.
Both of them are quite expansive. They cover quite a wide range. I mean, the horn one starts on the space of about an octave, but then it expands. And then further. So you've covered that whole space, which is quite wide-ranging. If you then look at the cello theme, it starts down at the same place. It's actually slightly wider, but not much. So they both have this sense of expansiveness, of space. They're not claustrophobic.
I had a bit of a go at a horn player because he was mouthing. He could see that I was nervous because I didn't know much about directing professional musicians. I knew a lot about how to make a good form, but not about directing. So he could see this, and that suited him to have a bit of a go. And I said, I leant forward. I said, another word out of you, mate, and I'm over there. Bang. You know, and in the bot, they're all going, Christ almighty, Ron's lost it.
Brass, cello and choir skillfully arranged by Ron Giesin. The album was especially well received in Britain, where audiences were eager to embrace the new progressive rock. It's hard to credit it today, but in 1970 this album went to #1 in the UK album chart. Difficult to believe now that this avant-garde piece was once the most popular taste of an entire nation.
No one had actually cut the tape at that point. It was considered that maybe there would be problems if it was edited. Consequently, Roger and I had to do the backing tracks in one pass. It was a 23-minute piece, something like that. We probably took about the third take where we actually got all the way through it because it was so difficult for us to remember where the hell we were in the piece. So from then on, the thing in some ways went downhill.
When we'd finished all the recording sessions at Abbey Road, I said to Steve O'Rourke, the manager, I said, that was a good rehearsal. Can we do it again, please? For real. Of course, that was never to be because of the energy levels and the money constraints and the whole bit, and EMI wanting to get the stuff out. So reality prevailed, which is a state of art. It always has been.
It is the main title piece, which the band have come to dislike.
I wouldn't dream of performing anything that embarrassed me. If somebody said to me now, right, you know, here's £1 million, go out and play Atom Heart Mother, I'd say, you must be joking.
It's a concoction. It's an assembly. The speeds were all wrong. Like when you're moving through a piece, you know when it should speed up, you know when it should slow down. In fact, the reverse happened with some of the sections, because when they stuck the sections together, they didn't actually really work. So my job, the job part of it, not the art part of it, the job part, was to craft something sensible on top of this rather cobbled collage or montage and make it look like it was working.
Pink Floyd must have been one of the first bands that started using orchestration within their music. I mean, obviously you had bands like Deep Purple who did their concerto. You had Uriah Heep who had a stab at it with Salisbury, which ironically probably works better than most, although it's the least known of any of them. Pink Floyd won again. I'd sum it up, I'd be polite, I'd say it's interesting.
Many people would say that Atom Heart Mother symbolises Pink Floyd at their most pretentious. And there were two particular reasons for this, I think. One was the cover of a cow, which really had nothing to do with the music at all, and was just selected at random. And the second one was the closing track, Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast, which consisted of no more and no less than their roadie cooking his grub. Now, that is bizarre, pretentious, indulgent, call it what you will, but the album got to #1 nevertheless.
With Pink Floyd now established as a headline act, the time had come to produce the album that would really prove that Pink Floyd could deliver music that was not just avant-garde, but also forge an enduring marriage of melody and experimentation. In that respect, Meddle was to prove a worthy successor to Atom Heart Mother. One of These Days was a bold and innovative opener which used two bass guitars played through a delay device to produce a disturbing and sinister feel. In the studio, the first bass was actually played by Gilmour, with Waters following a bar behind.
The lyrics are quite vicious, and again you've got all these kind of like weird effects and things, and it's a startling opening piece of music. I mean, it really kind of grabs your attention.
It's a great album. It's got the heavy sort of vibrance of One of These Days, and then you've got some lovely quiet tracks, and of course then you go into 20 odd minutes of echoes, and for anyone who likes 70s psychedelic music, it's pure bliss.
If Dark Side of the Moon hadn't come along, Medal might well have been considered Pink Floyd's magnum opus.
The real highlight of the Medal album has to be Echoes. This was the track which finally demonstrated a cohesive, unified approach to melody and form.
I think Echoes is arguably one of the best pieces of music Pink Floyd has ever issued on record.
Echoes itself is just unbelievable track. 23 minutes, absolute. You don't even have to take drugs. That'll take you there.
Starts to climb towards the light.
I think the beginning of Roger Waters taking control, he's now coming out of himself. Syd's gone, the writing's getting better, the compositions are getting better, the controlling of the production's what they want, the whole sound is what they want.
And this was the first album where it was just Pink Floyd, and it's a brilliant album.
Shortly after the completion of the album, the band decamped to Pompeii to make a film. This time it was not just the soundtrack. The new film actually featured Pink Floyd in performance, featuring material drawn from A Saucerful of Secrets and Medal. In typical Floyd fashion, it was decided to make a bold visual statement by performing without an audience in the suitably eerie setting of the ruined amphitheatre at Pompeii. Having no audience to worry about meant the director could get his cameras right inside the band.
And I felt at the time that we'd had enough of concert films. So maybe the main idea of the film was to do a sort of anti-Woodstock film, where there would be nobody present, and the music and the silence and the empty amphitheatre would mean as much, if not more, than a million crowd.
The brilliant, lingering opening shot, slowly closing in on the performers, established the fact that this would be no ordinary performance. This particular film is a well-shot and thoughtfully constructed piece, giving the viewer a superb insight into how the music of Pink Floyd was constructed. The director's use of both track and crane shots, combined with a liberal number of excellent close-ups, has allowed this film to survive much better than many others from the same period. Nick Mason's distinctive drum technique was seized upon by the director to showcase the understated excellence of Mason's playing.
It shows what a talented drummer he is, but again, because Pink Floyd didn't really have pop songs by that stage, they'd been there, done that. They were into these long, involved songs, and Nick Mason's playing was very, very much a part of that. You know, he created a lot of the sound effects live that they would have done some other way in the studio.
Taking away the moments that make up a dull day. You flitter and waste the hours in an offhand way. Kicking around on a piece of ground in your hometown.
What can I say about Dark Side of the Moon that hasn't already been said? If it's an album everyone should have in their collection. And most people have probably had the album in their collection 6 or 7 times over, which is why the band is so rich today.
By the time of Dark Side of the Moon, they changed their sound somewhat. I don't know if this was a conscious thing or whether it just became a kind of more kind of radio friendly, as well as the sort of soundscapes in there and instrumental bits. The songs have become very almost slick.
The Dark Side of the Moon was the first American #1 for Pink Floyd. It also produced the unusual phenomenon of a hit single.
I wouldn't have thought Pink Floyd were even conscious of worrying about a hit single. I think the irony is not lost on most people, though, that the hit single was called Money.
How to follow Dark Side of the Moon was always going to present a great challenge. But with Wish You Were Here, Pink Floyd showed the only way to follow a masterpiece is with another masterpiece.
When they brought out Wish You Were Here, a stunningly good follow-up. I mean, I don't believe you can ever truly follow up something as big as Dark Side of the Moon, but they near as damn did it there.
The continuing degeneration of Syd Barrett was the inspiration for Shine On You Crazy Diamond, the opening track of the album. In his lyrics, Roger Waters was trying to puncture some of the misleading myths which had grown up around Barrett. Ironically, this song may have done more than any other to add to the misconceptions.
As we start off with the G minor drone, and then the horn comes in G minor as well, first note being a G. But the melody has so many gaps in it and so much space that it tends to take the listener away somewhere else. All G minor notes. Then we start up on B flat for the next line. And finally up to the D, and the next line starts on the D as well. We repeat that little phrase again, and then back down to the G. Then we go back up to the D, and down to the G again. Then we have a D minor 7 chord suggested with the C, A, F, D. And finally the last phrase, G minor, it ends on a G.
the band itself was probably on the brink of disintegrating. A lot of tension, I believe, about greed in the band, of all things.
When I put it on for the first time, I thought, yeah, that's really good. It's got all the Floydisms in it, but they're presented better, the stereo sounds better, the tricks are better. That's what I liked about Wish You Were Here. To me, it was a better produced record.
Year after year, running over the same old ground. What have we found? The same old fears. Wish you were here.
Wish You Were Here is must be fairly specifically about Syd, but it applies to so many other things. It has an emotional depth, and it's sort of fairly universal, I think. And I suppose you could say that we haven't done quite as many concerts as people like the Stones have or someone. So my performances of Wish You Were Here still number in sort of 300 or 400, I suppose. There's another thousands that some people might do. But it still resonates. It still has its meaning. It means that to me every time I sing it. It's a brilliant, it is a very, very good combination of music and words that seems to capture something.
I feel that the Wish You Were Here album doesn't have a set theme or a set tone. Every song seems to be slightly different, from Shine On You Crazy Diamond to the barbs of Have a Cigar to the almost distressed insouciance of Welcome to the Machine, almost the acceptance of, well, what are we going to do? To Wish You Were Here, which seems to be a longing for something that's already gone. So I don't think Wish You Were Here as a song represents what the album was about so much as an element of what the album was about. And the album went in different directions, and a lot of the album is couched in Syd Barrett terms, not in the way the music was presented, but in the way that they were trying to bring this ghost from the past into the modern environment, to still make him part of what they were doing, because he was very much still a crucial element in the Pink Floyd story.
It's actually quite emotional, standing up here with these three guys after all these years. Standing to be counted with the rest of you. Anyway, we're doing this for everyone who's not here, but particularly, of course, for Syd.
Does Wish You Were Here stand up as a masterpiece? I think it's a flawed masterpiece. It's an excellent album, but it doesn't quite have the same impact as Dark Side of the Moon, apart from Shine On You Crazy Diamond. The other songs, Wish You Were Here itself, Have a Cigar, Welcome to the Machine, and so forth, are all very good, but they don't represent the pinnacle of Pink Floyd's work in the way the Dark Side of the Moon does. Having said that, though, it's still a great record. It's still a very important record, and 99% of the bands on the planet at that time and now would love to make an album half as good.
With two absolutely classic albums behind them, the pressure was once again on to deliver. Roger Waters was by now the lead composer. It was his concept to take two stage favourites from 1974, called Gotta Be Crazy and Raving and Drooling, and rename them to form the heart of a suite of new pieces called Animals.
I'm afraid that Animals for me is the beginning, the parting of the ways for me with the Pink Floyd. I just began to see it as, I found it quite indulgent, and I found the music had become very remote. It was no longer friendly or relevant.
Personally, I liked the album. It was written almost in totality by Roger Waters, and I think that shows. You know, he was really starting to grab the writing reins and move forward. So of course Gilmour in some ways appears to get pushed to the background.
Once again, their design team was up there alongside them, producing images which were perfectly suited to the bleakness of the concept. The sleeve design for Animals is another of those covers which have burned their way into the consciousness of record buyers worldwide.
Well, they did use Battersea Power Station, and I doubt they ever believed how iconic that would become, because it did become so synonymous with Pink Floyd. You know, even in the tours they did for Momentary Lapse of Reason, you know, they had the pig flying across the Wembley Stadium and anywhere else they played. So, yeah, it's a classic cover, a classic rock cover.
The Wall represents a major milestone in the history of Pink Floyd. By this time, Roger Waters had become the de facto leader of the band, contributing the lion's share of the material and demanding more and more of the creative control.
Rick Wright's keyboard playing, which was such a distinctive part of the Pink Floyd sound and their early albums, right up to Dark Side of the Moon, where it plays a very prominent part, becomes much less prominent over the next couple of albums, through Wish You Were Here and Animals, until by the time you get to The Wall, he's scarcely there at all.
Despite the power struggles behind the scenes, as an album, The Wall works brilliantly.
Well, The Wall works as an album as one of the classic, iconic rock albums of all time.
It might have seasoned things a little more to have had a bit more input from the other members. Perhaps because it was a double album, and perhaps it was because it was such a magnum opus. Certainly polarised people like no Pink Floyd record has before or since.
We don't need no education.
It's a song that when you listen to it and you put it on today, it is one of the most recognisable pieces of music. It's very simple. You know, everyone can hum the tune. And
Roger Waters is arguably no better, no worse than the people that he was writing alongside at the time. But it has to be said that, all in all, it's just another brick in the wall. Will probably not go down as one of the greater lines in rock.
All in all, you're just another brick in the wall. There is no pain you are receiving. A distant ship smoke on the horizon. You are only coming through in waves. Your lips move, but I can't hear what you're saying. When I was a child, I caught a fleeting glimpse out of the corner of my eye. I turned to look, but it was gone. I cannot put my finger on it now. The child is grown, the dream is gone. I have become comfortably numb.
I think Comfortably Numb actually hits home lyrically to a lot of people who are in their 30s and 40s today. People in their 20s, when it first came out, great song, but did you really understand what it was about? I certainly didn't. But I think later on, yes, I did. And funnily enough, it's a piece of music, although The Wall is not my favourite Pink Floyd music, it's a piece of music that I've held on to because I don't ever want to be comfortably numb.
One major change of direction was the fact that for the first time since 1968, Hypnosis were not called upon to provide the sleeve artwork. This time the job was given to Gerald Scarfe.
One day Roger Waters rang me up and said that he was writing a new piece. His idea was that we should make a film of it at that point, and it immediately interested me. I started work there and then on one of the pieces from the album called The Trial, and working on it has brought out a whole area of my work that was unexplored.
Scarf's work for The Wall was first seen on the minimalist album sleeve, which featured the stark image of the outline of a bare brick wall. Inside was the familiar lettering style and grotesque cartoons which were Scarf's hallmark. But the real reason for Scarf's selection lay in Roger's vision for the stage show and the movie which would accompany the album.
He has a wonderfully strange brain, which is this way around, where most people's brains are the other way around. His drawings have a weird psychopathic quality, which I think have coaxed us into dark corridors that we might not normally have explored on our own comfortably.
His animations in The Wall are on a par with Disney's Fantasia, but it's like Fantasia, you know, done by a madman, a schizophrenic, a paranoid person. I think that they are absolutely superb. They're brilliant.
The world that Scarf created in The Wall was the world which is not existing anywhere else but in the main character's head. His hallucinations, his dreams, his memories are all morphing into one and creating this nightmarish, almost Kafkan alienation spectrum which Scarf uses quite powerfully. The Scarf's animation for The Wall could exist on its own. It succeeds on its own right. Whether it sits well with the rest of a narrative and a film imagery, that's a different question.
Scarf's idiosyncratic animations were to become a key motif for The Wall stage shows. Once The Wall had been built, the audience could not be expected to just sit there, so The Wall was transformed into a giant projection screen for Scarf's amazing animations. It also served as the base from which giant Scarf-designed puppets of the characters would emerge.
But Gerald Scarf seemed perfect, really, perfect creative partner for Roger Waters, because they both seemed to share and express this sort of anger, perhaps stemming from their upbringing, their experiences, their political views, and all of that seemed to match perfectly, really.
Scarf's vision as an artist, you know, and as a you know, a bizarre, macabre cartoonist with gruesome visions, is just unbelievable.
Debate still rages today as to which was the most successful version of The Wall, the album, the stage show, or the movie.
I think the whole Wall experience does have to be viewed as a whole: album, movie, stage show. But without doubt, if you want to take one of those in isolation, it has to be the stage show. Has to be. I still think it's the most ambitious thing anyone's ever staged. You know, whether you talk about, I don't know, Kiss or some weird operatic thing going on. I think that stage show has never been surpassed in terms of the way those bricks came up, as I say, the way those crazy creatures leered out at you. It was just an awesome experience.
I think it worked better than the film in a way, because well, you could see and hear the musicians playing, which is always a bonus, and you got the extra element of the visual images and the presentation. So I think it worked better than the film, and the album is something that's so sprawling. It's not something you take on lightly. You don't listen to bits of it, I think. Being a huge double album, but very intense and very important lyrics that you need to listen to and study, that can be quite a draining experience. So I think you have to set aside time for that.
Yes, The Wall has its shortcomings, but the attempt and the bravery to combine all these elements together proves that the existence of The Wall is important and valid.
Take all your overgrown infants away somewhere and build them a home.
However, there was the strong possibility on the next record that Waters was now exercising too much creative control and was now in danger of revisiting too much familiar ground. The final cut certainly failed to live up to the artistic success of its illustrious predecessor. For many, there was a distinct sense of déjà vu.
There's no humour there at all. It's very much Waters' repressed communist, socialist sort of feelings coming through, and his distaste for society, which, you know, on one level is good, but on another level it's very serious.
A lot of people who love The Wall clearly hated the final cut. I mean, listen to the final cut now, and again, it's an interesting piece, but it sort of follows on from The Wall, but it doesn't work like The Wall did. But then I don't think anything ever was going to work like The Wall did.
The final cut did find itself built around 3 or 4 spare bricks from The Wall. That is true. But the Falklands War, which had come about between The Wall and the final cut, very much flavoured the other material that Roger Waters added to his bricks, to such an extent that Dave Gilmour decided he didn't want to have a credit as co-producer, although I believe he did take the royalty.
Creatively, the final cut lacks the brilliant spark which made The Wall such a spectacular success. For the first time since 1967, Pink Floyd were releasing an album without the input of Richard Wright. It was also launched without the involvement of either Hipgnosis or Gerald Scarfe to fall back on. Even the sleeve lacks the cutting edge of previous outings.
I felt that Roger was resurrecting tracks that we had not accepted for the Wall album. And I did say to him, they weren't good enough then, why are they good enough now? It got so difficult that Roger wanted me to not have a say in what was going on the production side of the album, so after a lot of arguing and umming and ahhing and soul-searching, I agreed to come off the production credits.
You can see and hear the fragmentation of musicianship, individual personalities within the band, because it really was a Roger Waters solo album. I think most people who know Floyd would probably say and agree with that.
With the departure of Roger Waters, who resigned from the group in 1985, it looked as if a legend had finally been laid to rest. However, David Gilmour was determined to carry on despite the legal and artistic pitfalls.
You know, when old bands get together again, there's normally one central motivating factor, and that is that they need the money, you know. And people grow as they get older, and they change and they move in different directions. And the other guys in the band and myself have moved off in separate directions, and I doubt very much if our paths will converge in the future.
Well, Roger Waters thought that Pink Floyd should be dissolved after he left, but I think time's proven that the fans didn't want that. I mean, Dave Gilmour, of course, took the reins, and there were numerous court battles and legal issues going on for many years, but when he actually finally won control of the name, and then of course brought out his Momentary Lapse of Reason album, I think he proved a point there. Pink Floyd name was far from dead.
Attraction is holding me fast. How can I escape this irresistible grasp? Can't keep my eyes from the sun side. Tongue-tied and twisted just to earthbound high.
When Momentary Lapse of Reason was recorded, Dave Gilmour had to re-establish the Pink Floyd brand, and unlike when Syd Barrett had been fronting the band, there was no real recognisable face. That worked to his favour, because really all he had to do was reproduce the sound, which obviously he'd been a part of for many, many years. He later told us that Nick Mason and Rick Wright had not played a big part in the recording of the album because their self-confidence had perhaps been bruised by the previous regime. So in some ways this album is the product of a one-man band, but a very good one at that.
Most Pink Floyd fans did like it. I mean, they might not have liked the fact that Roger Waters was not in the band, but it was still a good album. It wasn't an absolutely outstanding album, but it was a very good album.
Dave Gilmour was never going to be Roger Waters. In fact, it was going to be something different almost by definition. He wrote the album with the help of a lot of other people. It never had the conceptual feel that previous Pink Floyd albums had done. But I think if you listen to it, you have to say it's a Pink Floyd album.
Sweet smell of the great sorrow lies over the land. Plumes of smoke rise, merge into the leaden sky. A man lies and dreams, green fields and rivers, but awakes to a morning with no reason for waking.
It's vastly different than The Wall. A vast improvement on the final cut. No matter what anyone says, I think that's very clear to Floyd fans anywhere.
Dogs of war and men of hate. With no cause, we don't discriminate.
The concerts were great, and the job they did on bringing the delicate sound of thunder to fruition was great. It's a highly listenable live album.
There were people who believed that the Pink Floyd lineup post Roger Waters was really nothing more than a glorified tribute band to the band that had made such classics as Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here. There can't really, therefore, be any point in them re-recording material that Roger Waters had a hand in, because by doing that, they're really only perpetuating something that ended long ago. However, having said that, a tour that lasts for 3 years and takes in 200 dates has got to have a film, DVD or live album programmed into it to cover the costs. So I think these things were a necessary evil.
I think that anyone who's heard David Gilmour's coruscating guitar solo on Comfortably Numb in the Delicate Sound of Thunder live album would disagree with that. He certainly takes that song and takes that solo to a completely different place.
It was to be 6 years before the huge Pink Floyd audience would get a taste of the band in the studio. At last, in 1994, the Division Bell appeared. Ironically, this very last of the 12 Pink Floyd studio albums was to be the only Pink Floyd album to hit #1 on both sides of the Atlantic.
Nick Mason and Rick Wright were now fully functional and part of the team. But with Dave Gilmour not being a dab hand at writing lyrics, he enlisted the help of his wife-to-be Polly Sampson and also Nick Laird Clues of the Dream Academy to help him. Together with other collaborators, the songwriting tended to be a little diluted compared with previous efforts, where Momentary Lapse of Reason had perhaps been a collection of songs that he'd been unable to use in the previous Pink Floyd lineup.
I think it's got a nice feel to the album. It flows in and out of the individual songs very, very well. And you know, whether people can say, oh, it's classic Floyd or not, is almost irrelevant. It's not a bad album at all. And I think a lot of that comes through from, you know, Gilmour's wonderful playing in the album, for starters. The contributions from the others in the band, of course, make that work so well. But also the influence of Bob Ezrin.
Did Floyd do the right thing by retiring after Pulse? By God, they did do the right thing. And I hope they never f***ing return.
Get back. Well, I'm alright, Jack, but keep your hands off of my stack. Monday, it's a hit.
People in rock don't retire. They either die or they come back. It's really simple as that.
No, retired, they did the best thing they could, like gentlemen.
They've made a massive contribution to contemporary music, massive, as big as anyone you could say. They were a concept band in every way, artwork, shows, music, and they changed everyone's view.
Get together, guys. Sort your differences out. Put something together. And if not, David Gilmour should get out there and you know, put another Floyd album together, because he's more than capable of it.
All Pink Floyd fans want you guys to get together again. Think it might happen?
No, it's not going to happen.
Not going to happen?
No, there would only be one reason for it happening again, and that would be if we were all skinned. And we're not.